for those of us who are older than, 25, we really have to make sure to stay current. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we have to use everything, but we have to understand it. Because if we don't understand it, we will be left behind, and that will become a painful thing.
Hey everyone, welcome to winconductor.org. I'm looking forward to talking with our next guest, Alex Shapiro. We recognize her work in the band community as being rather cutting edge, integrating a lot of technology in the band community. And I recently ran across one of her posts where she was sharing with some students, college students, about the where we're at in music with the integration of new technologies being brought into our classroom, whether forced or by choice, which for most of us right now is through being forced to learn these new technologies. But she has some really intriguing ideas and concepts about how that will have a positive impact on not just music education, but music in general and live performance and stuff like that. So looking forward to talking to her. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Aaron. This is great. I appreciate, you inviting me on for the conversation.
Yeah, so I do like to kind of get to know my guests a little bit, just in case people who aren't maybe familiar with you. You've written a lot of works for band, and one of the cool things that I like about your works is you integrate pre-recorded audio into live performance, and it's kind of a neat, unique thing. Uh, but there's a lot more depth to your composing and your the stuff that you've put out. So tell us a little bit about maybe your background and some of the things that you've been involved in, things that maybe, what are some of your more proud moments and everything?
I think just waking up and putting, one leg into each pant leg at the time becomes a proud moment at this point. But I think one of the joys of being a composer right now is in the 21st century is that there are no rules anymore, which means you can express yourself however you want to. And just like I like to eat a lot of different kinds of food from a lot of different nationalities, I really
Yeah,
enjoy writing a lot of different styles of music. And so I find that as I get older and older, my pieces reflect my interest in jazz or my interest in serialism or my interest in Brahms or anything you can name, no matter how disparate seemingly. I
right.
just did a piece that was kind of EDM house music, and now I'm doing something that's a little bit more serial tone poemy. So it's never a
Nice.
dull moment, and that's something I really really enjoy. So my career has been an amalgam of concert music, and prior to that, 15 years of solely commercial music, doing film and TV and corporate videos, and
Yeah.
you name the gig, I did it back in LA. I lived in LA for 24 years before moving up here to beautiful San Juan Island a little bit later. Maybe I'll turn the camera around and show you guys what it looks like out
Yeah.
here. Or you can go to my website or Facebook page and see
Yeah.
because there's lots of videos there. But I've been here on the island 13 years, and it has no bridge. But fortunately, where I live now, I have 1 gigabyte fiber optic right to the studio, right into
Oh,
the house,
nice.
which is pretty awesome. So I'm not suffering in terms of connectivity to the world. But I have a large catalog of chamber music, and I just finished producing a CD that'll come out later this summer called Arcana, which is my complete solo piano works performed really beautifully by the New York pianist Adam Marks. And I'm very excited about this album coming out because it
Yeah.
represents a part of my writing and my heart that a lot of people who only know my band music wouldn't know, that I
Right.
that I have all this chamber music and solo piano music as well. So that's really been fun. So the interesting thing for me is that the all the work that I did in Hollywood and doing a lot of electronic music, because everybody, of course, doing commercial scoring, has a project studio and has, I mean, this goes on and on and on. It's a lot of screens, a lot of tech here, and great fun and many options. But putting it all together, having that background in electronic and digital audio working commercially, and then turning my attentions and focus to the concert music world, which is really where my heart lives,
Right.
and realizing after a while that bringing those worlds together could be quite fun in terms of the power of a digital audio track, and often a very cinematic kind of one,
Right.
that is written at the same time supporting 100 people on stage, in a wind band or something.
Yeah.
It's thrilling. It's thrilling. It's a very powerful sound, and it doesn't take much tech to pull off, because all you need, the conductor just wears an earbud in her or his earbuds, and you got a couple of speakers facing the audience, and away you go. It's really very simple. Everything's just triggered once from the laptop, and off you go.
That's
So
awesome.
the power where it triangulates to the audience, that's how it's mixed and devised, that all that sound is hitting them. It's endless fun. And I'm
Yeah.
always just challenging myself to come up with new and different approaches to it. So that's how, kind of a quick overview of my morphing, going, classically trained, going into commercial music, and then going back into concert music, chamber music, and now band music as well as chamber music.
You know, I think that's interesting because yeah, I like how you tell the story about how your music is reflective of your experiences in the commercial industry, which, looking back at the 20th century, television, film, before that, radio had a major influence on the development of music and the way the general public really listens to music. The some of the great composers out there right now are film composers, and we're seeing another shift into like video games and stuff like that. I mean, the composing that is going on for some of those video games is absolutely amazing, and I
Yes.
love that. you know all of this was what kind of grew into this artistic outlet into live performance with your music. So you know uh, and I'm one of the things that has been coming up lately is the use of the new technology, and nobody would have wished the the pandemic on anybody. I mean, it is horrible. It is. There's so many uh, negative things that we can focus on, but I think in a lot of ways, what we're experiencing is kind of a forced evolution into the 21st century. And you spoke some about that to the students, and maybe just kind of rehashing some of those ideas. How do you kind of foresee the integration of this new technology kind of influencing what we're doing as a profession?
Yeah. Well, let me start with what it isn't, just to put everybody at ease, because this comes up a lot. In no way is tech or anything that we are going to be doing in the future, which I love talking about, that I foresee, in no way is it a substitute
Right,
for live human beings vibrating in a room together. I can't stress that enough, because that's one of everybody's biggest fears. And nothing will ever substitute for physical touch, pheromones flying around in a room, looking at each other, playing off of each other's body movements and body language, hearing when it comes to playing music, hearing each other and
yeah,
responding to each other in live time, where every millisecond makes or breaks a performance, the quality of a performance. So I can't stress that enough. We always have to start there.
right,
So it's not either or. It is both. It is a matter of both, is where I see us going. And we already do that. Certainly anybody who plays my music knows that
right,
you have both, all the live musicians having hopefully a good time up there on stage with a live audience, and additionally a pre-recorded track. It all
right,
can live and breathe together and make everything better for it, or different. I'm not even going to say better, because I'm not comparing an electroacoustic work with an acoustic symphony or something. They're totally different animals. That's like saying an oboe is better than a viola or something. They're wildly different. So it's never either or. And what I do see, and you touched on it, is that I liken it in a sense to the industrial age, to other epochal changes that forced us into a new era, whether we thought we were going there or not. I do see this pandemic as being such a time for humanity, because this is the first time the entire globe has paused. I mean,
Right.
not just a few cities, but really most of the globe. It's astonishing, and certainly within North America, it has been wildly astonishing just to see. Here, we know what happened in Europe. It's just been overwhelming, and rather than see this as a limitation that we have to be now only online with each other as we practice social distancing or physical distancing. It's not
Right.
social
Right.
distancing, but physical distancing. As we do these things, instead of seeing it as a limitation, I view it as an opportunity. And I think that how we parse our language and how we speak about it determines how we feel about it and how our peers and colleagues perceive it as well.
Right.
It's easy to say negative things about all the things that we don't get to do. We all miss being able to play music together right now. It's heartbreaking. You know, this is what we love to do. But there are other things that are things that actually only this format gives us a chance to do. For instance, if we were playing live music or in a classroom setting right now, I wouldn't be looking at your diploma and other things behind you, and you wouldn't be looking at my setting, and you might not see my cat jump into my lap, and all these intimacies that I call them, digital intimacies
Yeah.
that we are provided by being able to meet face to face, pore to pore sometimes,
Right.
over this technology all over the world is quite spectacular. It gives a connection to people that we cannot get in a concert hall. Not on this way. We get a different connection in a concert hall. It's not
Yeah.
either or. It's both.
Right. Right.
So here, what I'm discovering after 2 months basically of a lot of Zooming, we've all been Zooming away. And I mean, this is, I think, the sixth Zoom I've had today. Second interview, I taught a class earlier. I mean, it's just been, I had meetings, and it's been, this is the way we are relating to each other. But it really does connect us. And as we get more comfortable with chatting with each other this way and understanding enough about the text so that it becomes invisible and we
Right.
don't have to worry about it too much. That's there are many opportunities to be had. There are different things when we talk about. I've been speaking to a lot of band directors and a lot of educators about this upcoming fall semester.
Yeah.
Because pretty much everybody's assured they're not going to be in person, or at least not largely or not entirely. And so the question is, okay, what do we do? And how do we keep live ensemble programs up and running? How do we keep connection between musicians and students in general up and running? And it's what I see it as is we can't, because we don't have synchronous audio yet. We will,
Yeah.
but we don't yet. We are not going to have it by the end of the year. I sincerely doubt. Um, so since we don't have what we really need, instead of trying to make our online connections and classes what we would like them to be in the former life when we were, and duplicating what we could do in live time in the same room. Let's think of other additional ways that we can expand and broaden the meaningful scope of what we can give students and what we can give musicians and experiences that we can give them using the technology that we have, and not trying to do what we can't do, which is put them in a room together to play
Right.
their trombones. Bye
Yeah.
bye. It's not going to happen right now. So it broadens our thought, and at least my thinking, about all the things that we can bring to students, that a conductor can bring to their ensemble meeting virtually, that maybe they wouldn't have been talking about or having them experience. If it was just business as usual, there wouldn't have been time because we'd be rehearsing pieces, and working through them and score study and all that. But we'd be playing the instruments. Now we have other things we can do. We can explore so many different things, including composing and improvising.
Right.
We can explore tech, because no matter what you do in this world, really, especially in the arts, it is not enough anymore. I can tell you this firsthand as a working composer for many years. It's not enough to just be, a composer stick figure on legs who sits here and, writes a lot of music. And no matter how good your music is or isn't, it is not going to be enough, because you have to be able to function to get it out there in the world. We wear a lot of hats. Everybody knows this, but it's worth reiterating that the skill sets that we have now are many more than we had to have 40 years ago, before
Right.
the internet, before desktop publishing, before all of this. The demands on a working artist to be socially engaged, to know how to share their files and their work, to know how to excite people and engage people and interact with people, they're very different than they had been.
Yeah.
And so these are things that within the time that we have, that we're not playing our instruments together, but we still want to educate. These are the kinds of things that we can bring into the scope, I think, of classwork and ensemble work. And I'm seeing firsthand in one really interesting example, how this is working really unexpectedly quite well. I was very fortunate, out of the blue. Tim Salzman, who heads up the band program, excuse me, at University of Washington, about almost 100 miles south of me in
Right.
Seattle. He contacted me about a day or two after that university and many others shut their doors, knowing, hey, it's only mid-March. We still have a whole semester to get through. It wasn't canceled. He still had to do something with more than 200 music students. Some were music majors, some weren't, but they were all in the
Hmm.
band and several bands and the orchestras. And what do? He called me and we had this great conversation because he knew he wanted to maintain the sense of community. He knew that he wanted to make sure people could still play their instruments because they love playing.
Yeah.
And he knew that maybe somehow, somewhere, he knew that we didn't have synchronous audio, so he understood we couldn't do any of this. But he also knew that maybe some form of composing could come into play, but he didn't know how to quite, put it all together. And we had a great conversation. And after I hung up with him, I just, off the top of my head, I wrote up like a 5-page syllabus of what I envisioned a class could be. And if you want, I can run it down because it's been working really well, or we can move on to something else.
No,
There are, there are things that can work.
no, I think that's great. I think, in the education community, band directors are, I was watching another interview. There's a band director in Texas, Chad Dempsey, and he's started up a new YouTube channel called the Hey Band Network. And he was talking with Joni Perez. And, in that interview today, she was saying, you know, with this platform, this Zoom platform, you can't go and do the routine aspect of the band program like we've been accustomed to. You can't do the same thing over and over again, which is an important part of the ensemble, developing ensemble. They've got to have that routine. So, I mean, a lot of directors are trying to figure out, what's next. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of inspiring because it's forcing a lot of us to go back to some of the creative juices
Yeah,
and really think of stuff outside of the box. How can we touch these kids when we don't have that physical interaction? We don't have that mass ensemble together. So,
exactly.
to put that in, I would love to hear some suggestions.
Well, it's true what you said about, inspiring your own creative juices. I always say to people in our field, we're all creative for a living. This is what we do, right?
Yeah,
Conducting and teaching and writing, be as creative in your life as you are in your work.
right.
You are a creative person. So use that creativity to think, outside of the taco shell, so to speak, especially at times of crisis. We have to think on our feet. None of us chose this. It
Right.
happened so suddenly. The thing that really, by the way, fries me is that nobody got any time to sort of gather their thoughts about this massive world change, grieve a bit over what
Right.
has happened to us in humanity, and much less collect their thoughts about for a week or so, what can I do with my class? Most people I know had to get up and running in a day or two. Like
Yeah.
boom, just, okay, well, we're online now, continue as you were. And it was kind of crazy. And I'm not a teacher, I'm not on faculty anywhere, but I observed this time and time again with all my friends and colleagues. And I just thought, oh, this is crazy. Nobody had any preparation time. So the fact that everybody's doing as well as they are is really laudable. I mean,
Yeah.
my hat's off to everybody because I look at what people are doing and I think, gee, that you had no up and running time to get prepared for this whatsoever. So what they did at University of Washington, I actually thought that, I'd send them my ideas which I wrote up in pretty much syllabus form of,
Hmm.
here's classes and here's what we would do and here's the next class and yada yada. And I said I couldn't be part of the faculty on this just because I'm busy with deadlines, but I would oversee it. I would definitely be involved. And I figured they'd maybe choose one or two things out of it and create something totally different or whatever. They ended up doing the entire thing as I envisioned it, which
Oh, wow.
for me, I was delighted. I sent in an A flat drone that I grabbed actually from another track. I took part of another track that I had already produced, just to make this down and dirty. I sent in two versions of it, a longer version, 2.25 minutes, and a very short version. It's an undulating A flat drone, so it's kind of interesting. It undulates, a little bit of microtonality, but basically A flat. And so the other track was only 15 seconds long. And my idea was this: take your 200 students from the various bands and orchestra or whatever, break them down into small sections, no more than 10 people if you can, and preferably sections from their own instrumental sections, because it will give them a head start as they work together. They know each other in person, they're familiar with each other. And this is, we want to get them as connected humanly as we can.
Right.
It helps when you know the person in real life. So break them down into these little groups. Hand out the little drone to everybody just to keep everybody in tune, with some tonal center. But that doesn't mean they have to be writing in A flat at all. They can do anything they want, but it's just something to kind of keep them grounded. And have everybody on their instrument, or if they choose, or if they don't have their 5 octave marimba, in the living room or something, they can use their voice, they can use their body, they can use found objects, they can use anything at all to make sound, to compose a 15-second passage. And I kept it short for
Yeah.
two reasons. One, I don't want them to be intimidated because none of them are composers. I don't want them to go, oh my gosh, I can't do 2 minutes of music. Listen, I wake up and I think the same thing. I can't do 2 minutes of music. I'm not going to do that to them. It's hard enough when you actually are paid to do it. So 15 seconds, they didn't have to notate it. I want them to play and I want them to write a contribution, and record it. And we gave them resources to understand how to record quietly on your phone or whatever,
Right.
the basic stuff, and upload it anonymously. Title the file with is something that describes what you would describe the music passage as being like, some adjectives or something,
Yeah.
but don't add your name, because I wanted to keep them anonymous among each other to give them freedom so that they wouldn't feel embarrassed or something, how we
Yeah.
are. So everybody, let's say if it's a group of six, they all upload their files separately and then they all download everybody's file. So then suddenly they all have six very different motives, passages.
Yeah.
Then they're tasked with opening up, a DAW, like, GarageBand is free, or Audacity, or whatever they want to work in, and start composing. Make a sonic quilt. Use these motives in different ways. Put them in any order, up, down, side to side, whatever you want to do. Run what we call plugins, effects and stuff through
Hmm.
them if you want. If you want to get fancy, I said for the first pass, just don't chop them up. Keep them recognizable, because this is where we get into the composition lesson. Here they
Right.
are taking their own original material that they played, and now I want them to not only create their own essentially 2 minute long or whatever piece with it, but then they upload those pieces, and then in their next class they're talking about playing those pieces and talking about them together. And that's where you start in teaching about development and form and motives and what makes a motive and what makes something recognizable, and the subjective aspects of why does one string seem to be a little more musically effective than another string. What is it about putting these different things in these different orders that makes us respond to them different ways? And we get into vertical harmony, how something is wildly changed by how you harmonize it vertically. This is an
Yeah.
object lesson, and they are creating the object.
Yeah. No, it's
And
awesome.
it's very exciting to me because none of them are composers.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know how this was going to go. And I said to them when I first met with them, online, I said, listen, we're all guinea pigs, we're all lab rats. You guys are really patient, doing this with me. And if it tanks, we
Yeah.
learn that it doesn't work. I gave them total permission for this not to work because I don't know, I've never done this before. This is a wild idea. Well, they're still doing this. We're into round two where they've now taken motives from these things, the existing motives, and now adding to those motivically. And so the quilt is getting bigger. And I think we're going to start letting them expand and choose from other sections groups as well. So, it's
Oh,
going to
nice.
get more textural. And the composition lesson grows and they keep playing because they keep adding to it. So and they're checking in with each other all the time. So it's
Right.
ticking all the boxes. And I got to tell you, Tim Salzman, he writes me wide-eyed saying, "You won't believe what they're doing. It sounds so amazing." And I tune in, they give me the link, I see what they're doing, and I'm just gobsmacked by the beauty and quality of what
Yeah.
these strings of music, of original music, are turning out to be. And several of the students have contacted me. I've talked to them at length personally. They're really interested in pursuing composing now. They want to keep doing this. It's really an eye opener. So here is just one example. It's certainly not the only example, but it's a good lesson or a sample for everybody about something that is a different way of doing band, but you're still doing band.
Yeah.
They're just not doing band the way we're used to doing band.
Yeah, and I love it. There's a couple things in there that I just want to kind of highlight. The project itself is great because just as you said, there's so many elements to it. You have the collaborative element to this, even though they aren't in together physically, they're still collaborating with one another. They're feeding off of one another. You've got the critiquing of one another, making musical judgments about what they're hearing, what they think is quality, what they want to use and evolve in the future. I mean, all those things. Are elements that are going to come back into the full band experience and is going to make it great. And plus, just the fact that these kids are experimenting with creating new music. Uh, they're experimenting with composition and stuff like that. Something that they may never would have done in a traditional band setting, and I love that aspect. You said something else that I think is so important that I really want to highlight. Uh, you went into that group of students and you said, we're all guinea pigs, and you were very upfront about it. I mean, and I think that's important for everybody to embrace is sometimes we allow the fear of failure to override our willingness to go out and try something new. And, the cool thing about this, every day is new. This is a new experience for everybody. Nobody, if you would have asked anybody 6 months ago that we were all going to be staying home, the only way that we were going to communicate with people was through Zoom, and nobody, people would have thought you were crazy and out of your mind. So I mean, I think it's great. Don't be afraid to try something new because this is new for everybody. So whatever you do is going to be good. It's not. It's going to be great. It
Yeah.
may not work exactly like what you were planning, but I love the fact that you were upfront about this because the kids know it.
Like they know exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how we learn from each other. And the other thing that I said, like to the students who contacted me, I specifically asked them, I said, listen, I think this is going well. And from what I understand from Tim, and, I think we're going to probably continue this in some way, even when we can also meet in person. I think this might be an addition to the program in some way. What I want to know from each one of you is how can we make it better?
Right.
You guys are the ones that are doing this. What would make it even better? Or is there any part of it that isn't working, that we should take out? This is how we grow together. It's a collaborative art. Music is a collaborative art.
Yes.
That's the joy of band.
Yeah.
It's collaboration. So this
Yeah.
is in a sense, in some ways, it's leaderless collaboration because all of their ideas are equally worthy. They're all going into the pot. And then they all get to do their own thing with all those ideas. And then a faculty member is assigned to every section for their Zoom meetings together. So there's somebody, moderating the conversation, but basically the students are handling it all. And it's just going really well. But I think, yeah, the fear, this is a truth in everything we do, that it's so easy to stymie ourselves, to terrify ourselves, and to essentially, this is where writer's block comes from a lot of the time, is to be so afraid of not doing something perfectly
Right.
or even not well, God forbid, much less perfectly, that we don't do anything at all. And if we're paralyzed like that, we'll never put one foot in front of the other. You have to give yourself permission to fail because it's all those failures that lead up to the success. You know, very few people are brilliant and are going to get it right on the
Right.
first bounce. I mean, God, most pieces I write, I'm starting that piece so many different times before I land on the right idea. You know, I said this earlier today to somebody. I said, wasn't it that Edison invented the light bulb 2,000 times?
Yeah.
You know,
And there,
1999 didn't work.
yeah, yeah, that's what the quote I think I remember was somebody was asking him why he didn't give up after all those
Right.
failures. And I love his response to that. He said, well, those weren't failures. I just learned all those different ways that it didn't work.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that. I mean, that's just it. We have to. We're in a society that puts way too much pressure on people that they just have to be, you know, fabulous all the time and perfect all the
Yeah,
time. Nobody in real life is like that. That's just all an airbrushed version of life. It doesn't exist.
right.
We all fall on our backsides constantly, and you know, composers do it privately. You know, it's not. This is not a group activity. So I'm falling on my backside all the time, and then what ends up getting published is the one time when I might not have fallen on my backside, but y'all didn't see all the other times it didn't work. So yeah, I think instilling that in students, especially, is anybody who's younger, lifting that barrier. And you know, I wrote a chapter quite a while ago, a few years ago, in a book called Musicianship, Composing for Band and Orchestra. It was a book with a number of chapters written by a number of different wonderful people. I was delighted to be a small part of this.
Right.
And my chapter actually had to do with, it addressed writer's block and freeing up your inner composer, basically. And one of my great beliefs is that we're so afraid of failing no matter what we're doing, whether we're conducting or teaching or performing or writing, we're so afraid of it because if we don't do well, we won't be approved of. And if we're not approved of, we won't be loved. And it's this, ultimately, it's a fear of not being loved. And this is a deep rooted, deeply human emotion that we want everybody to look at us and think we're okay. So what happens is if we don't allow ourselves to just blurt out something on the page and then go wait before we immediately strangle it and edit it and throw it out, but let it be there and assess it. If we get rid of it too quickly because we don't want anybody to think that we're not good enough, we can't progress. We can't get better. And ultimately, at the end of the day, all of us are just seeking a personal excellence. It's not competitive with anybody else. It's just our excellence to ourselves, to the bar that we're hopefully raising for ourselves to do better and better as artists. So
Yeah,
I can't speak about this enough because it's the kind of thing that I wish people had told me when I was younger. You know, it
right.
takes a long time to come to this. So,
That's yeah.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, and it's kind of fun to kind of think about what is next, in a positive manner,
Right.
because everybody's worried about what next is going to look like. So many band directors have no clue what that fall is going to look like once they, uh, whether they're going to enter the classroom or if they do, what it's going to look like. But let's kind of project out a little bit. And how do you foresee some of these new technologies that, not just music community, but specifically us, that these new technologies that we're embracing in these educational moments, how do you kind of foresee that kind of having an impact on what is coming ahead?
I think we do have to always try our best to imagine the things that we can't imagine. And I keep coming back to, you know, the smartphone, right? When this came out in 2007. I mean, there were other iterations of it, but the iPhone, I think, was 2007. That is merely 13 years ago. That's not long. And it very quickly became something that we cannot leave the house without. We feel absolutely naked without our phones. And you know, it's become an indispensable item, just like answering machines. I remember getting my first answering machine in 1980. It was a big tank of a box. It was huge. And we never had one. No one ever had one before. And then what happens? Suddenly, you know, you can't imagine not having a voicemail or an answering machine or something taking your messages, right? The things that happen, we adapt to them more quickly than we want to admit, to the point where we're reliant on them. The internet, of course, is the most obvious one. Desktop computers, all of this. I think that if we look backwards, 20 years ago, so many years even before the iPhone, we could not have imagined the iPhone. We could not have imagined having this amazing square rectangular brick in our pockets that could do all the miraculous things that it does. We simply would not have had that conversation. So we have to now, we've looked forensically back, we have to look forward and say, okay, there is something that will be here in a matter of a few years that, as we're talking today, we cannot imagine what it is. But we might have some vague idea, but we really don't know. And I guarantee you, whatever it is, we're not going to be able to live without it. Oh, well, we can live without it, but we're not going to want to live without it. We'll be dependent on it. And so I keep thinking, looking at, let's say, the iPhone, it annoys everybody, I think, that every iteration of the phone has one less button or one less input. I've noticed this, and I don't have any inside knowledge about this, but my suspicion is because they keep getting rid of the inputs and the buttons and the things that we're all used to manipulating, because implants and wearables, but especially implants, don't have any buttons. Holograms don't have buttons. When we're dealing with right now, Oculus Rift and other makers of the headsets for virtual and augmented reality, these are big, for the most part, big, bulky things. But that's a prototype, just like Google Glass was,
Right.
which is much less bulky, but still, that was a prototype. The next iteration, the iteration they're selling now for, I don't know, about $1,000 or something, is much more streamlined looking, but still, Sony has, for a long time, contact lenses that you can pop in that you can do video from, etc. I mean, we're not going to be wearing bulky things. We're certainly not going to be carrying phones. I am convinced of this. We're going to laugh about the days when we worried about dropping our expensive phones and shattering
Right.
them. My feeling is that we are headed into a world that can be quite beautiful and wonderful, that even though being in person will always be the best thing,
Right.
that in addition to being in person, I believe that by utilizing virtual reality scenarios and mixed reality scenarios, we're going to feel like we are in the room together. We will be able, of course, synchronous audio and no latency whatsoever, meaning very fast connection speeds around the world. We have a long way to go. All of this has to be developed. We still have areas in this country that have no connection whatsoever. I mean, it's abominable, right?
Yeah.
And this is a terrible. This leads to equity issues in education, because if you can't, if not everybody has access to being online and having their Zoom classes, that's not very helpful right
Right.
now. That's another
Yeah.
discussion. But anyway, what I see is that the technology will do a great deal to give us a vastly enhanced experience of connecting with each other and connecting with material. I wrote to a colleague the other day. I said, you know, think about it this way: the right now in the back of a classroom, if I'm giving a lecture and I'm showing a score and it's going to be on a laptop projector that's on the front of the room, and you're sitting, I don't know how many yards back. So you're sort of squinting and not having a very close experience with that material or anything else I'm projecting. But now everybody's zooming on their phones or their laptops or their screens, and we're very close to the material. Same thing with audio. Instead of me playing something over crappy classroom speakers or a bad PA somewhere, with distortion, now everybody's listening to an MP3 or something that I'm not going to get into the fact that it's compressed and there are
Yeah.
problems with it, but still they're listening under slightly better conditions. They're closer to the music, so they're able to see and they're able to hear in a more intimate way than they are in the classroom. They are also able to do this at the same time with each other. So you can argue that there is still community. Is it as good as being in the same room having that experience? No. Any more than I always think about movie theaters where we all have big TVs and sound systems and we watch our Netflix or our movies in our own little, home movie theaters now. But nothing is the same as going to a comedy, let's say,
Yeah.
in a movie theater packed with people laughing at the same time you're laughing. That it's a social activity, and I miss that. I miss not experiencing that with people, or scary movies for that matter. I don't go to them, but scary movies where everybody's scared together. It's a very tribal thing,
Yeah.
and I don't, right now we can't have that. But I just encourage everybody to think ahead toward not only what the new technologies might look like. I mentioned holograms before. There's all kinds of for being developed for a long time. And look at Imogen Heap and the gloves, and there's a lot of stuff going on for a long time in developing this that is pretty groovy. Some of it's clunky. Some of it's all just prototype stuff getting us to the next level. But look at it as opportunity that we can share art in ways that right now we cannot imagine. The concept of multimedia is going to go sky high to something that is, potentially very, very wonderful and emotionally fulfilling.
Yeah.
And I think I said in that video clip that you saw, like everything people invent, I'm sure it'll be used for evil as well. But let's not think about that right now when we're talking about music education or music performance. Let's think about all the wonderful things that can happen and how we can reach people using this technology.
Yeah.
So I am as curious as anybody to see what's coming down the pike. Um,
Yeah, and relating it back to students, the, this, I was talking with in another interview, and we were talking about the video recordings and stuff like that, and it's the older generation, our generation, that is more apprehensive about this technology. These kids are interacting nonstop in quote unquote video chats or whatever it's labeled, whatever app they're using. They're used to going home and spending hours trying to perfect a dance move for TikTok. I think back to my students, the band kids. They they would the band was their social gathering where they would come together and work towards something beautiful and great. But at the same time, these kids would go home and spend time online in video game rooms where we have kind of a glimpse of what may be possible in the future,
because
because
their
these kids.
avatars are playing together. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and they're interacting with one another live. They are they're wearing the headsets, communicating. It's all live and in time. And
Exactly.
what is that that virtual connectivity is something that is ingrained in the younger generation that we're not able to relate that way. Our connection to our friends, I me growing up, it was freedom when I finally got my driver's license in a car. The kids aren't necessarily experiencing that now.
They don't
You know,
need to drive anywhere to be able to see each other and hang out together. They just are doing it virtually. It's
yeah,
different. It's different, and you're absolutely right. I remember a few years ago I saw somebody's grandkids. They were 1.5 years old, barely 2 years old, and they were twins, and they both had iPads, and they were there on the iPads using these iPads better than you and I could use them. Zip, 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 zip. They knew exactly what they were doing, what they wanted to see. Swipe, 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 point. I'm watching this with this tiny human being, thinking their brains are being wired differently than ours ever were. This is when they're young and they're absorbing all this as a user interface, a way to relate to an object to get a certain result. It's pretty basic. And they are wired, as you said, with this experience from virtually day one in a way that adults haven't had the opportunity to be. We caught up, most of us caught up,
yeah,
but I am fascinated by that. Um, it's going to be very, very mind blowing what
yeah,
happens. And I think the more sobering message is really for those of us who are older than 25. We really have to make sure to stay current. It
yeah,
doesn't mean we have to use everything, but we have to understand it. Because if we don't understand it, we will be left behind, and that will become a painful thing. I mean, listen, I live on a remote island where I could conceivably turn all this stuff off and still have a beautiful life, in the woods and by the sea and whatever, and play my piano. I can do that. And when the power goes out, that is what I do. But I'm good at that. But in reality, as we go through life, we humans are tribal, we are societal, and if it would be like not knowing how to operate a telephone or a TV or some basic appliance, your blender is in the kitchen. I mean, everybody kind of knows how this stuff works, a toaster, right?
Right.
And it's like you can survive without knowing how to use the toaster, but it's kind of nice to know how to use the toaster.
Yeah.
So I always caution my friends who are, are middle-aged or older, and just say, you don't want to not keep up. You don't have to like it. You don't, because I'm sure we are not going to like some of this stuff. I already have a problem with some of the game issues and some of the content and all that,
Right.
right? You're not going to like all of it, but it's our responsibility to understand it. We don't have to fully embrace it, but we have to understand it.
Yeah.
It'll be too painful to be left behind, because I find now, if I don't pay attention to something, for 6 months, oh my gosh, it's major catch up. Okay, how did this change and now what?
Yeah.
It's happening at a faster and faster exponential incline, and hang on to your hat.
Yeah. Yeah, and great advice. And I can't think of a better way to kind of conclude our conversation tonight. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. And for people who may not be familiar with your work, where can we find out more about you and more about what you're putting together?
I have a ridiculously way too comprehensive website at alexshapiro.org, O-R-G. Don't go to the
Okay.
.com, it's .org. And you can listen to your heart's content to all kinds of things. The works page, the catalog page leads you down many rabbit holes. Everything has audio, a lot of things have video, and have fun. And I welcome anybody to contact me, alex@alexshapiro.org, and share your thoughts with me, with Aaron, about the future. What are we looking at? What are the problems and what are the joys that you perceive? Because there will be both. I'm excited about it, which isn't to say I paint an entirely rosy picture about it, but I'm very excited to see where we're headed. And I think about this a lot. I always have, and I can't tell you how exciting it is, Aaron, for me to have this conversation with you, who is thinking about these things as well. I don't get to have these kinds of
Yeah.
conversations that often with like-minded peers. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah.
It's very enjoyable for me.
Well, it's been a blast for me. I've really enjoyed. I've been an admirer of your work, and it's great to actually virtually meet you in person. So
And at some point, we will shake hands.
yes. But Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.